I use generative AI like every single day, 20, 30 times a day. I use it for, formatting transcripts, helping me troubleshoot and write Python script. There are, yeah, definitely things as aids to a skilled person's reasoning and judgment. I think is very useful. I think at the moment, the most useful use cases are like discrete process improvements, things you are already doing that you can then in some way outsource or expedite using AI. I just get sad when people hit the big red publish button and, expect it to change the fortune of their business.
I'm Jonathan Gandolf, and welcome to the Content Cocktail Hour, powered by The Juice. Our mission is to squeeze out the deepest secrets of B2B marketing professionals to help you push your brand to the forefront of the industry. Let's raise a glass. Welcome back, everybody, to the Content Cocktail Hour. We have a very special guest today, somebody whose work we as a team have admired for a really long time. Ryan Law, thank you for joining the podcast today. I mentioned it's been a while that we've been kind of admiring your work. That goes back to your days at Animals. Animals was early on our platform, and I remember we've got an inspiring content Slack channel. You were a recurring guest in that channel, sharing your content internally. So I'm excited to have you officially as a guest on our podcast. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for having me. And vice versa as well. I was always super interested in the juice. Like, I just thought it was a really interesting product and problem to try and solve, like curation from peers in your network. It's a really interesting concept. So yeah, lovely to chat.
We appreciate that. Well, Ryan, I maybe previewed a little bit of your background, Animals. I know you're now at Ahrefs, but maybe in your own words, I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey to where you're at now and what you're up to now.
Yeah, sure. In the simplest form, I've basically been doing the same thing for about 13 years. I'm like a lifelong content marketer, basically. I started out literally when I was at university writing SEO blog posts for, solopreneurs for about $2 a pop, trying to put my way through university. Did that for a few years, joined an agency, ended up kind of pivoting it, becoming a co-founder, went from there to join Animals just as a kind of entry-level writer, and had an incredibly good time there. Ended up part of the leadership team, the CMO, after like 5.5 years. And I joined Ahrefs about 11 months ago now, something like that. Ahrefs is one of those brands that I think a lot of content marketers look up to, myself included. So I was super pumped to join a team that already knows what they're doing and super intimidated to try and add value to their already amazing content. So that's what I'm doing.
Fascinating time to jump into explicitly the SEO space, very literal SEO space. So we'll dig into that a little bit later, but this is the Content Cocktail Hour. Ryan, we always like to ask our guests what they're enjoying drinking nowadays.
So I recently, we've got a very young child and on the back of another even younger child. So coffee has been playing a pivotal role in my life. I got a nice espresso machine. I just bought a coffee grinder and you're getting a little bit fancy and pretentious there. I love, black coffee. That's like my favorite drink in the world. And even when I drink beer, for example, I tend to get beers that taste like black coffee. So
I love that. I'm very similar in that same boat. So that's awesome. Well, cool. Let's jump in kind of to the meat of the conversation today. I mentioned, again, I hope I don't sound like I'm over the top here and kind of my fandom of your work, but I think the reason your work always resonates with me, with our team, is that it's always rooted in research. That's something we at The Juice have even tried to imitate, not only from you, but a lot of other brands and folks as well. I think, especially now in the generative AI kind of era, we're always telling our customers, our customers are asking, how do we stand out? How do we make unique content? And that's one of the things we always share is that, your proprietary data can't be replicated, at least not yet. So I'd be really curious and just kind of maybe the root of your kind of research-driven thesis and creating research-driven content. And then maybe we can get into a little bit of the process as well. And I can lead us down that path also.
I think your content marketing generally is an industry of, to be blunt, and I include myself in this, armchair criticism. It is a bunch of people whose job is largely to synthesize the work that other people have done into slightly new and slightly more novel formats. And that was what my early career was. I was Googling for any topic I was interested in, Googling 20 articles, synthesizing that into something that I'd done myself. And if you have the most popular brand or the most powerful domain from a search perspective, that can be enough, and that used to be enough for a lot of companies to get good results. I think we're massively seeing the diminishing returns of that type of content today. Everyone is switched on to content marketing. Everyone knows how to do that. I think the only kind of longevity to any kind of content moat people build for themselves has to come from proprietary data in some format, something that you have access to, or you can collect, or you can synthesize and analyze in an interesting way that other people have never done before. So that is kind of the root of everything we try and create. Every article we write and publish, I try and imbue some aspect of that mentality into it. That doesn't mean, doing a data study every week, but it does mean finding small little ways to create proprietary information in everything we create. And yeah, that's probably the single most important thing I try and teach our team to do and help our team with day to day.
And it shows. I think all of your content's so helpful, actionable, intellectually stimulating. I think it's so easy for us to write, a blog post, right? Or just a thought leadership, as it's sometimes referred to, and it's not really backed by a data. And I think a lot of times, I think people are starting to see through that more and more now. But I'd be curious in that, you're trying to include data in everything that you do. Well, what is the process? Is it narrative and then finding the data to fit the narrative, or is it data and then building the narrative around the data?
It varies hugely, I think, because probably the most constraining part of trying to include data in content is the effort of it. As content marketers, constrained optimization is the name of our game. We don't have unlimited resources. We have to be very careful with where we allocate our effort. And we have to be very pragmatic about the topics that are worth lots of effort and those that we can get good results with less effort. So actually, a lot of what we do, the starting point is working out what effort is necessary to make this good, to achieve the result we want from it. At the small end of the spectrum, if we're writing an SEO article for a keyword that's interesting, but maybe it's not mission critical, maybe the search volume is okay, but it's not crazy high, we want to include something new and interesting in there, but we don't want to spend a ton of time about it. So, maybe we'll interview one person, or we'll do a quick straw poll on social media just to add a little bit of information gain to that process. But then the other end of the spectrum, maybe a few times a year, I think there's a huge benefit to pouring your life and soul into creating a data study or a benchmark report or some kind of huge laborious foundational research that you can then parcel out into everything else you create throughout the rest of the year. At animals, for example, we did a couple of pillar pieces of data content. They took months. They were frankly hideous to create, but we kind of dined out on those for the year up until we did the next one. And it gave us original information to quote, people to link to, all that kind of thing. So I think that framing the effort of it and working out what a proportional amount of data to collect is probably the most important thing to get started with.
It's fascinating. We were doing quarterly trends reports. And what I loved about the process was that it always started, we've got a Slack channel that is just data questions. Those trends reports always started with a question. It was can we answer this with data? That's the first hurdle, right? And then it was, well, what do we learn from the data? So the most recent one we published was actually at the end of last year that was on the state of gated versus ungated content. And we found some really interesting data points that we are doing them quarterly. And I'm speaking past tense about it because we've found so much good data from that one kind of effort or endeavor into our own data set that we continue to kind of dine out on it, like you said, throughout the course of the year. And we're we don't need to publish a new trend report just to publish one. We've tried to let it happen very organically, and that's worked well for us and sounds very similar to you kind of answering questions with data. I'd be curious, though, two-part question, maybe related questions, though. What is the bar for this data is good enough to go to market with in content? And then two, what happens when maybe the data tells you something that you don't want it to tell you?
Yeah, good questions all, and things I had to think about a lot. One of the biggest barriers to doing any type of content like this is my own kind of, I'm going to use a curse word here, my own bullshit detector, basically, because the amount of times I read something and I think a couple of seconds later, I go, that was a really suspect methodology, or, that's 20 people or something like that. And I think that goes double in SEO. There are a lot of very smart, very data-focused people that will not shy away from calling out your methodology and there's a correlation study. How can you learn anything from a correlation study? So while I'm super conscious of that, from experience, we've got very, very good results from data that was very, very simple. As long as you feel defensible in what you're sharing, you've interpreted it in an honest way and you're willing to share some of the methodology behind it to make it a discussion, I think there's a lot of value to sharing very, very basic things. So I'd always encourage people to not get psyched out by the kind of intimidating aspect of it. I always think the bar in content marketing generally is still extremely low. No matter how competitive it is, there is still much, much more we could do to everything we create. Yeah.
Let me respond to that first. I think I was surprised in our own trends report, like really rich data on very basic topics is still like really powerful. And like you said, it can start a discussion, which is, kind of the whole point, right? And even if the discussion is dissent with your opinion or perspective, I think even that can be healthy in the right setting.
I've just remembered, yeah, because I was thinking about this. What happens when the data doesn't support the hypothesis? And that is a
Right.
really great question. I've come across this with customers before, where as a content agency, we were hired to create a piece of data content, and we've ended up so invested in the work, and the customer is effectively paying for an outcome, not for the research. They want something to validate and support the thing they are paying money for, that you kind of get forced into publishing something that's not very good and not very convincing. And that is always the risk of this. So something I try and do for myself and my team is to counsel us to view data analysis as not part of content creation. It's learning for us, because we have to be able to say that we had a hypothesis that we were super excited about. The data does not show that whatsoever. And actually, it would be really silly of us to try and publish something based on that. And that's really hard to do because there is a sunk cost associated with that. But I think it gets a bit easier if you can mentally uncouple data analysis and research from any single bit of content creation. Just view it as like a constant rolling process that you're always doing. Our job as content marketers, at the end of the day, we are here to support our companies. We're here to help support the messaging, to help promote our products and features. There is an element of you should feel comfortable saying something that supports the business as long as there is some data to back it up. It's very defensible to make a little squinty judgment call. We're not all data scientists for the most part.
That's so good. I love you're not doing the data to produce content. You're doing the data research and analysis to learn. It just so happens you then have the opportunity to create content based on the learnings. I think that very simple perspective shift is very, very powerful. What would you share with a marketer who maybe they aren't creating a lot of data-driven content right now? They know they want to get started. Maybe they're resource constrained, like you mentioned, or have a small team, or even if they have a big team, they just don't have the capability to start the way they'd like to start. What is the best way for somebody to take the first step down this path?
Probably some kind of survey. It is the simplest possible form of data collection, but it can still be actually really quite interesting if you survey a particular audience that you are interested in. Certainly one of the reasons that stopped me doing a lot of data content in the past was a kind of lack of fluency with the language of data science. It can seem super intimidating, working out what the right visualizations are for data, working out which type of correlation is the most legitimate for whatever you're doing. Super, super hard, very scary for people like me, with a background in writing. But just starting with a survey, 50 questions in a Google form that you send to 100 people. If you add a bit of context around that from your own experience, that can actually be a pretty cool piece of content, I think.
It creates a great flywheel to share the content back with the survey respondents, right? I think that's a underrated kind of element of surveying. We've ran that a few times, and it really greases the engine for getting that content distribution rolling.
Yeah, I love that. If your target audience is actually very small and in some case, maybe not even particularly online, they're not searching for a bunch of keywords for you to reach them. But if you can include that entire audience in a research study, not only are they interested in it because it reveals something about themselves and their industry, but as you say, you've also got access to the people that might become your customers as well. It's a beautifully clever thing to do, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, you and I, even pre-recording, I've debated how much I wanted to talk about this topic because it is exhaustively talked about everywhere you look right now. And I've shared an anecdote in the past. We're venture-backed business. We were fundraising right as generative AI was being kind of released more broadly in the market. And I always joke there were a lot of investors who weren't as educated on the topic as maybe they would like to believe they were. And the question always got presented to me that, they'd kind of talk about AI. And then the question would be something along the lines of so artificial intelligence, what do you think? And I was just like, that's such a like bad question. But I'm going to turn it around and ask it to you here a little bit. Given your role at Ahrefs, given what Ahrefs does, it would be malpractice by me to not kind of gain your perspective on the impact AI is having in SEO. I'm not going to explicitly ask for kind of your prediction because I think we're all kind of just guessing there a little bit, but maybe people who don't have the expertise in SEO but are trying to navigate this new world and everything that's changing right now. What are you seeing working, not working right now, and kind of where do you see this all going in the short term and long term?
Yeah, very lucky that I've been thinking about this for a long time because there are people at Animals that were much more clued into this than I was. And we got access to a very early version of like GPT-3 when it was in closed beta. And we were, we're a content agency. We make writing for a living. So I thought it kind of behooved us to spend a bit of time and energy working out like, what happens? What are the consequences of this? What should we do? And one of the things we did was we tried to build a kind of hybrid, skilled boutique human content agency AI workflow. And we worked with like a select group of customers to try and take their publishing frequency from 4 articles a month to 40. So, I think of a lot of SEO content. You have editorial content, which can be quite slow and expensive. It's generally human involved. You don't publish that much in a given time period. And the other end of the spectrum, you've got like programmatic content where you can create it automatically. You can publish thousands of pages. This was kind of a middle ground. And the thing we learned from that experience was that middle grounds are a terrible place to be in like every capacity. It was not a fun process for the people involved. I think the cost savings and the time savings were not substantial enough to make it better than like programmatic, and the results were not good enough to make it compete with human content. And it was just this kind of really unhappy middle ground all round. I do think generative AI is massively changing how we all access information, and it is already having a huge impact on Google as a search engine, with like AI overviews and that kind of thing. The use case I'm much less interested in, and I think is much less worth pursuing, is rote AI content generation, at least without some very careful process for adding new information into that process. I've seen lots and lots of companies get very excited that they can suddenly publish 100 articles a week, see their traffic seemingly rise for a few months, and then either get wiped out or else realize that there was no monetary value to the types of keywords they were actually targeting and ranking for anyway.
Yeah, it's we've seen it feels like this, we've all been riding this wave. Like I think that was the first like aha use case, like, oh, we can go publish a ton, but to what end, I think is kind of what you're saying. I've been viewing it, me personally, and I think I certainly have the opportunity to learn more, but more as like an operational efficiency. Like AI has this, there's 4 different, not just like content, but a lot of like operational efficiencies that AI can create. I've actually since, I'd say probably the last 3 or 4 months, I've been thinking about it less from a content perspective, which has been interesting. I don't know, again, a very personal experience, but I think still trying to navigate and figure out where the puck is going on all of this.
Yeah, and I totally agree as well. I think at the moment, the most useful use cases are like discrete process improvements, things you are already doing that you can then in some way outsource or expedite using AI. Because I use generative AI like every single day, 20, 30 times a day. I use it for, formatting transcripts or for helping me troubleshoot and write Python script. I was learning how to write Python, and actually it was amazing, like teacher through that process. Yeah, or just brainstorming titles, things that are actually quite hard for us because we get locked into a certain way of thinking. It can be good for just giving you 50 options to look at and say, I hate all of these, but the reason I hate them is because of this, and therefore my good idea is going to look like this instead. There are, definitely things as aids to a skilled person's reasoning and judgment. I think is very useful. I just get sad when people hit the big red publish button and, expect it to change the fortune of their business.
Right, exactly. All right, well, we always like to end the episode asking, what is one unpopular opinion you have as it pertains to B2B or content marketing?
I thought about this and I tried to pick the thing which I think is my most genuinely unpopular. It's like something that I've had the most pushback on. And I think basically that there is a time and a place for quality, and not everything is deserving of quality in some cases, which is maybe kind of anathema to what we've just been talking about.
Yeah.
Because I wrote about this a while ago, and Something I've observed in content marketing, anyone that writes, we are very precious about quality. That is the kind of mantra we all follow, and it's all expected of us. We do our best in everything we do, and we try and make everything quality. But the problem with that is, obviously, we talked about this earlier, a company has limited resources, right? I think it's a misallocation of effort to approach everything we publish with the same level of rigor and precision. And actually, there are plenty of things the average company can publish and create that do not need to go through half of the processes of review and approval that we expect of them. And I thought that was a fairly pragmatic viewpoint, trying to put on my CMO hat for a little while. As a lot of what I had to do as a agency leader was balance resources, basically. And I got so much pushback for that on LinkedIn and emails and things like that. It was by far the least popular thing I've ever said.
That's interesting. Ironically, it makes me think of podcasting a little bit. I think sometimes people are so afraid of podcasting because the production, the editing, and I always just get started, hit record, and especially now there are a ton of tools that can help with some of that. But we were very fortunate before we even had a product. We were podcasting with customers, future customers, people we admired. I remember it was our marketer who really pushed us on it. And I was like, we're going to start a podcast. And it was 8 days from thinking about it to recording the first one. We learned so much from that. And even if, again, I think if the production isn't what you want for external purposes, you learn so much internally. It's just hit record and go. So I love that advice. It's one of the more unpopular opinions I would say that we've had on here. And I appreciate you sticking to it. And I think there's some wisdom in there as well. Ryan, what if our audience wants to learn more from you or learn more from the content you're creating? What's the best way to do that?
All of my creative energy goes to the Ahrefs blog at the moment, helping the team with their content, but I also publish quite a bit there as well. Yeah, I'm quite active on Twitter and LinkedIn, sharing things that pop up into my head, other unpopular opinions. It would be very remiss of me to say as well, but we are in the process of putting together a conference as well. So a big physical in-person conference in Singapore in October. So if anyone wants to check that out as well, that would be very, very cool.
Love that. Well, we will get all of those all of those links in the show notes. Ryan, again, really appreciate you taking the time, sharing your perspective on everything in the space. I would strongly encourage our audience to go check out what you are creating. Like I said, it's been very influential to our business, and I trust it can be to yours as well. Everybody, thank you for listening. Until next time, we'll see you same time, same place. Cheers. Thank you for joining the Content Cocktail Hour powered by The Juice. If you want to see more episodes or more resources curated for your role, join us on app.thejuicehq.com. See you next time, same place. Cheers.